The unknown is that because the missile launchers in particular have been destroyed when they emerge and fire, and that means that it doesn't matter what's left in stockpiles, they mostly can't launch them? Or are the Iranians trying to play it cute and hold stuff back whilst they launch drones and exhaust regional air defences? The suggestion is that it is the former, but the danger is that it's the latter.
Britain used to rule the waves, and not that long ago, 3 days after Argentina invaded the Falklands, Britain began to send a force of 43 Navy warships to get it back. But now we seem to be struggling to send just one to protect British interests in the Mediterranean and the Gulf. So how did we get here? Vice Admiral Duncan Potts is a former senior naval officer who commanded 3 major warships on operations, principally in the Middle East, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Were you shocked to find that the one ship that we are sending, HMS Dragon, is not currently available and won't be able to go until next week?
Yeah, I don't think shock's quite the right word for me. I may have left the Navy, but I'm still connected and understand what's going on. And there's a big difference between a theoretical size of the fleet and that which you have available. I don't know the issues with Dragon. Initially, it was meant to be Duncan there, but there are usually some preps. But you did point out the analogy with the Falklands War, where, of course, at the time speed was important, and speed sends a signal as well. Yes, the longer it takes, and of course, once she sails, it'll be at least 5 days till she's on station.
I mean, you make an interesting point there about our ability to stand up quickly. Many people might think, well, we don't really need to do that anymore. It wouldn't be logical to spend a huge amount of money maintaining a fleet of warships when realistically we are probably not going to be asked to use them. Is there any merit in that thought?
Well, of course, that's the argument since the early 90s, when, of course, the Cold War ended. The first decade of my service, ships were either at 12 or 24 hours notice for sea, fully ammunitioned, fueled, victualled, and ready to go. That was the nature of the world we lived in. We then went into a new world, but that new world started to fragment in 2008 when Russia pushed down into South Ossetia, and then, of course, after, in the early 2010s, they took Crimea, and now the world feels a different place, whether you're operating in the North Atlantic, the Gulf, as long as Iran is still there in its current form, is a destabilizing force across the region through its proxies, but also its control of the northern shore of the Gulf, where everyone knows the statistic now, 20% of all oil comes out of the Gulf there. So the world has changed, but it feels as though we need to be quicker in catching up on that. And I know the point has been made. So many defence debates are just on buying new kit, but readiness and the ability to use what you've got is something that has certainly slipped over the past decades.
Yeah, that's a really good point to note in this conversation. Can you paint a picture for us? Because I know that you spent a lot of your career in the Gulf. We talk a lot about the Strait of Hormuz and the control of it and what's happening at the moment. There are reports that the IRGC had hit a US-flagged tanker, which was said to be on fire. I think later reports say that it has been damaged. What's it like in that area, and why is this strait so important and so difficult when something like this happens?
Yeah, thanks for asking me to paint a picture there, because sometimes you just get a shot and everyone focuses on the Straits of Hormuz. But let me put it in perspective. The Straits of Hormuz is the choke point, which is the entrance to the Gulf. And, in UK terms, think the Dover Straits. But the Gulf is some 500 miles. If you're sailing from Kuwait down to the Strait of Hormuz, it's about 500 miles. So think the North Sea. And typically the Gulf is about 100 miles or so wide. But it's a really congested and cluttered space. It's full up with oil and gas, offshore infrastructure. There's a lot of trading, lots of small boat activity there. It's not just pure sunshine, it's very humid, visibility is often bad. And very soon we'll be going into the Shamal season, where the wind blows from the northwest. and it's full of dust and sand, and visibility isn't that good. So it's really complex area in which to operate.
And what does that mean for our capability? I mean, should we have been able to stand up a ship to be there at much shorter notice than this, knowing what you've just said there? That, I mean, it sounds like it's still a very complex area.
Well, the great irony is, and I've spent, I first deployed there in 1982, and last was out there in 2016 while serving. A great irony, the Royal Navy established a patrol out there in 1979 when the Islamic Republic was formed, and that has been there 24/7, 365 until earlier this year. Part of that is because we're very much focused on the North Atlantic and the resurgent Russian threat there, and what's going on closer to home. But the reality is we just don't have the assets to support it, and the time we really need it is the time after 45 years we decide not to be there. And that is noticed by our regional friends, but in particular the United States as well. My time over there as a commander, even commanding a US task group, because we had that level of trust, it's in a slightly different place now because you've got to be there to gain the influence over what's going on.
Well, look, it's incredibly stark, and I'm sure a lot of people will be shocked at what you just said. Vice Admiral Duncan Potts, thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Israel's military says it has completed a wave of strikes against Iranian targets, attacking both above and below the ground. Footage has emerged of the moment an Israeli fighter shot down a jet over Tehran. Iranian attacks have also been reported with air raid sirens in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, as well as claims that an American tanker has been hit. Let's speak now to Matthew Savill. He's a former government policy advisor on Iran, and he's now the Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute. Hello, Matthew.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. Look, we're now in day 6. The US War Secretary Pete Hegseth says the US has only just begun. Is there a strategy that you can make out with what the Trump administration is doing?
I think there is certainly an approach, but the complication is that they seem to be sending mixed messages about the ultimate political objective. If we take what President Trump has said at face value at the start, then regime change is clearly what they are hoping for. But at the same time, they've also focused very heavily on something that sounds more like containment, breaking the military power of the regime and removing its ability to threaten outside its borders. And there is a bit of tension in that because there is every possibility that they can do the latter, but that might still leave a sort of angry and embittered rump that might still be able to suppress its domestic population.
We've heard this morning reports about, the CIA looking to arm the Kurds and so on. Should we, just like staring right at this, should we accept that from the Pentagon's point of view, perhaps from Israel's point of view, an Iran that is a collapsed, failed state is a success?
I think that might be the case from the Israeli perspective. I mean, they are clearly much more invested in collapsing the regime and have been apparently doing most of the targeting of the senior leadership, because I think they would be prepared to just come back and mow the lawn again in 12 or 18 months. I think that would complicate the US position if, having declared victory and walked away, they had to do similar down the line, and there would still be a considerable terrorist threat emanating from the Islamic Republic in that case.
Yeah, but if that's not what Trump wants, then what does he see success as looking like, do you think?
I think the point at which
I appreciate this is his problem, not yours, but I'm just keen to know your perspective.
No, I think the point at which he could easily essentially declare victory would be the point at which Iranian ballistic missile and ideally cruise missile and drone production has been hit to the extent that they simply can't launch much in the way outwards. There's also the question of the Iranian Navy and blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which is why the Navy and coastal defense batteries, cruise missiles, have been heavily hit by the US early on too.
Well, speaking of the Navy, although albeit not there, Iran's foreign minister has told the US it will come to bitterly regret striking a warship in the Indian Ocean near Sri Lanka, thousands of miles from the Gulf. What's the strategic significance of that ship and of sinking it?
I mean, I don't think there's much in the way of strategic significance other than it tells us that the US is prepared to go after Iranian forces or personnel wherever they may be. I mean, there was no real significant advantage to doing it in terms of what's actually happening in Iran and the Gulf. But I think it's sending a message about how this DOD and Department of Defense and how this US administration will fight this campaign.
Yeah, sure. I mean, how do you assess at the moment the state of Iranian arms and munitions? How much have they got left? How long can they keep this going? At what point, are they sort of weakened to the extent that the Americans and Israelis will hope?
Those are big unknowns. What seems to be the case is that the US and Israelis have, as they have said, almost total air superiority. They can fly pretty much anywhere they want and have significantly reduced the air threat. They're even using Reaper drones in Iranian airspace, apparently unhindered. They can apparently strike and find and strike leadership targets. The critical thing is finding and striking either the places where ballistic missiles are stored or the launchers when they mostly emerge. And the signs in terms of outgoing Iranian fire are that the number of ballistic missiles and indeed drones are both dropping. The unknown is that because the missile launchers in particular have been destroyed when they emerge and fire, and that means that it doesn't matter what's left in stockpiles, they mostly can't launch them? Or are the Iranians trying to play it cute and hold stuff back whilst they launch drones and exhaust regional air defences? The suggestion is that it is the former, but the danger is that it's the latter.
And look, when it comes to the nuclear threat from Iran, which has at some points been the main pretext for these attacks, how will we know when that threat is obliterated again, I suppose, from Trump's perspective? But I mean, what does that look like? What is the sign there that they'll be looking out for?
The problem is that military force can repeatedly set that back. It can kill scientists. It can destroy production facilities, enrichment facilities, technical manufacturing. It can't eliminate the knowledge. And so the question is a combination of what Iranian ambition is and what they can actually physically produce. I think it's worth pointing out, because the nuclear issue is really complicated. The general view amongst analysts who are being politically swayed is that what the Iranians were doing was building up a latent threshold capability. So once Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal and then the Iranians started breaking their commitments, they wanted to assemble the knowledge and the know-how and the fissionable material such that if they decided to construct a nuclear weapon, they could do it very quickly. But it doesn't seem like they took that decision. They basically wanted to wave it around as a deterrent. Well, that hasn't worked. So there's a big question about whether or not, if the regime survives, is the conclusion that it draws, we shouldn't have played around with having this almost capability. We should have just taken the North Korea approach and produced some nuclear weapons. So it's really a question of what does Iranian ambition end up looking like.
Finally, Matthew, the Pentagon says it's now looking into the suspected US strike on a girls' school in Iran, which is known to have killed a lot of people. What's known about that investigation, how far it's got, and indeed what actually did happen there? Is there any clarity on that?
I don't think there's clarity on how far the investigation has got, because that's an internal question, which I don't think they're briefing out at the moment. What some of the open source analysis seems to suggest is that there were a number of military targets around that school. It hasn't been confirmed that the US was responsible for that strike. The initial speculation was that it was more likely to have been the Israelis, but the analysis of these other targets suggests that maybe it was essentially an errant missile, that possibly they misidentified the location. I think it's genuinely hard to really know what has happened there until we get more from inside the US and Israeli governments.
Thanks very much indeed. That is Matthew Savill there, former government policy advisor on Iran and now the Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you, Matthew.